I'm Klara Syrewicz, and this is a very special episode of On Air. We are in Kraków, and we will be meeting an incredible guest, someone I deeply admire, Adam Gopnik from The New Yorker, who's an essayist, a book writer, a journalist, and a wonderful person. Please come along. Adam, thank you very much for accepting our invitation today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Klara. Thank you for asking me.
So you have written about such a vast array of subjects, from the Renaissance to French cooking to the root causes of anti-elitist sentiment. And today I would like to tackle the subject of liberalism and the rise of extremisms in Europe.
A small subject.
A small subject, yes. It's narrow. And because you've lived in France for so many years, and you're a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, and you're kind of an outsider looking in, I thought that we could talk about the meteoric rise of the Rassemblement National. So what do you make of it?
Well, as you know, the Front National, the preceding organization run by Marine Le Pen's father, has been in France for a very long time. So the ideas and the ideology of the populist right have been present as long as I can remember, as long as I've been visiting France. The great question is not where do these ideas come from, but why are they suddenly so popular? Why do they seem to be perhaps on the verge of seizing power? I think that when we look at the question of the rise of the extreme right, what's fascinating about it is that it seems so universal right now. We've seen it happen in the United States, in a country as improbable as Sweden, we see the rise of the extreme right, and of course in France, where it's always been dormant, it now seems to be on the brink of taking power. So in a funny way, Klara, what strikes me as the most significant thing about the rise of the extreme right in France is that it's no longer isolated, that we're dealing with a kind of global phenomenon now, not a local phenomenon. It's even true in India, for example, that we have this same rise of that kind of nationalist, populist right wing. So in a curious way, it seems to me, that the best hope, the most optimistic account we can give of it is the most universalist account, because it draws our attention to the truth that it isn't simply the politics, the internal politics of one country or another, because it's so widespread. It has to do with the permanent and eternal clash in human societies between the way that we're drawn to open societies, societies that welcome change, that welcome newcomers, that welcome pluralism as a principle, and societies that respond with fear at the same time and dream of once again being in a closed, homogeneous, safe, tribal society. And that clash between the open society and the closed society seems to be a permanent feature of human life.
However, I have this idea that the openness that you talk about is a kind of liberal idea of what liberalism offers, right? Pluralism and so on. But the grievances on the right are that right-wing voters have been somehow excluded from policies, from education, from an interpretation of history. Not that they were included in that pluralism, but that they were marginalized. And which is why now they have such a powerful argument. Do you agree with that?
You know, I don't really, in the sense that it seems to me that the persecution mania of the populist right is exaggerated. I lived in France for many years, and there was certainly no difficulty in obtaining the literature and the rhetoric of the extreme right. It was there for the asking. People disapproved of it, but that's part of the natural clash of an open society, is that you have ideas and people who argue with those ideas. The National Front, now the Rassemblement National, was always on the ballot, and its candidates ran for office. The significant question, of course, I recognize is, why when Jean-Marie Le Pen ran for president, and I guess it was 2001, 2000 in the final round, he was écrasé, he was crushed.
Yes.
And now we face the reality that in the next election, there's a very real chance that whoever the candidate is, and it's complicated because of the legalities, could win. So it's fair to ask what's altered. And I'm sorry.
Yes, no, because in the case of France, actually, there's an accusation that often comes up from the right that you have the gauche caviar, the sort of liberal elite that is hypocritical. Right. The assumption is they want the good of all of the little people,
Sure.
but they're actually...
Sure, and not to interrupt you, but argument, to give the argument a fair hearing, right? What they say is that the gauche caviar doesn't have to deal with the consequences, for instance, of mass immigration, right? They're not faced with the problem of street crime and of crime on the metro because they don't ride on the metro. That's a caricature, but that's a large part of the argument. And then there's the also perfectly normal, reasonable human feeling that there are continuities in culture, whether it's here in Poland or in France or in America, that are under assault, and that there should be nothing wrong with affirming your own community and your own traditions and your own legacy, that you shouldn't be prevented from being proud of being Polish or French or Hindu or American because of a false ideal of cosmopolitanism. That's an old, familiar argument. The response I would make to it is that it's a false choice. It's a false choice. One of my favorite French idioms is that grown-up people have learned to count to 2, so that we're not stuck with one answer. And we can say, we believe that we understand and accept that human beings have a need for community, and they have a need for common identity. And that's a normal part of human life. There's a great Canadian philosopher I admire very much named Charles Taylor. And he said, the problem with liberalism in the philosophical sense is that it asks the question, who am I? And not the question, where am I? And the question of where am I is the central human question. To whom am I connected? To what past am I connected? To what common language and culture do I belong? And that's a perfectly reasonable question. So that's one, we can ask that question. But the second answer is that that's never a fixed thing. That's never in itself something that we can narrowly define. It's something that's always changing. The identity of France has changed dramatically over hundreds of years. There was a time, let's be blunt, when it excluded Jewish identity completely. Then that was brought into France, and it was very effectively, with the catastrophe of the war of Vichy aside, nonetheless that countless French Jews feel themselves simultaneously to be French and Jewish. That's not a difficult thing for human beings to feel as a double identity, and that's healthy. And so what I think that every good liberal in the philosophical sense would say is that we have to embrace multiple identities in our lives. That's the normal human condition.
So speaking of that kind of plurality in our sense of identity, you actually said that being a patriot and recognizing your country's most unsavory episodes is something that should be done. But you also said that you have to be emotionally stunted not to recognize that. And now, so you're offering us a kind of psychological explanation for dogma, for the way people approach it?
Yes, I mean, the two things I think are true. One is that the distinction between patriotism and nationalism is fundamental for understanding our world. It's not an distinction original to me. But the idea is that patriotism is simply a love of place, a love of tradition, a love of culture, a love of buildings and costumes and food.
Yes, but Donald Trump loves American culture very differently from the way someone like you would love it. So he fires, museum directors.
Right, and there is exactly as he is a nationalist in the sense that he his emphasis is not on the things he loves about American culture, it's on the things he feels is victimizing American culture. It's on the enemies, and the emphasis is always on the enemies of American identity. And that's what the nationalist always does. The nationalist always sees the nation as the victim of outsiders who are besieging the nation, whereas the patriot emphasizes the beauty and singularity of the culture he embraces. Charles de Gaulle, for instance, right? He totally rejected Vichy in 1940 because it was a narrow nationalist, enclosed movement. So I think that de Gaulle is a perfect example of what we mean by a patriot. And we all know that it's possible to be a patriotic Pole and still take responsibility for the complicated history of Poland. It's possible to be a patriotic American, to love American traditions, to think that American music is the greatest cultural contribution of the past,
So you say.
of the past 100 years, and recognize the many flaws and faults and histories of persecution, above all the history of slavery, that are part of American life. Those two things aren't in conflict to me, they serve each other. Because we love America, we want America to be a better place. You know, it's, as someone once said, the slogan, my country, right or wrong, is equivalent to saying, my mother, drunk or sober. We want our mother to be sober, not to be drunk. And if our mother seems drunk, we want to use our energies to sober her up. I don't think there's a clash between embracing a cosmopolitan consciousness and being profoundly patriotic about the place you live and love.
Yes, but you also spoke about the idea of enlarging the circle of compassion.
Yes.
So I think this is what you're...
My turn, yes.
What you're talking about. But now you have the question of migration, and sometimes the weaponization of migration. That's a big theme for right-wing extremism.
Yes.
And it's a big theme in Poland as well, with the situation at the border with Belarus.
Right.
So what are the limits of what you would call this circle of compassion, of patriotism? Where do you draw the line?
It's a terrific question. And of course, it's obvious that if we're looking for an immediate cause rather than the universal cause for the crisis of liberal democracy, immigration plays a very large part in all of the countries that we've been discussing, the United States and Sweden and France and Poland, no matter how different their social organization is, the threat of immigration, or the perceived threat of immigration, in Britain as well.
Yes, with Farage and,
yes, and Brexit.
or
right.
Italy with Meloni in power.
Exactly. So that's clearly a profound problem. Somebody once said, I think intelligently, that if liberals don't resolve a crisis of immigration, fascists will. And therefore, we have to pay attention to it. And, you know, there are many highly liberal countries, like Australia, for instance, that have very narrow immigration policies in terms of illegal immigration. They welcome immigrants. They're immigrant countries. My country of Canada is very similar. It's a country made of immigrants, but it has, it's selective about welcoming immigrants. It isn't simply a country of asylum. So again, it's exactly, we have to count to two. We can say it is a completely normal feature of democratic societies for people to want to control their borders. That's not something that is some hideous sin. It's completely normal. But we can say at the same time that we want to do that with an eye to the broadest kind of compassion that we can plausibly produce. I know from my conversations here in Poland that when the Ukrainian war began, one source of pride for many Poles is that Ukrainians were welcomed in, Ukrainian refugees. That became complicated when the immigration began from Belarus, and those are the kinds of questions. That's what democracies exist to do, to have debates and arguments about those precise questions and find compromises that respect a principle of universal compassion, and at the same time respond to the natural human fear of being overwhelmed by another, which it would be unrealistic to tell people, oh, you should never worry about immigration. We're all citizens of one planet. That's not the way human beings conceptualize, perceive their experience. So the beauty of liberal democracy is that it consists of an endless series of precise debates about intelligent policy within the framework of an understanding that as much compassion and tolerance and pluralism as we can produce is, generally speaking, the most successful policy.
You spoke about debates and the fact that they're so important in this context, that without them you cannot navigate between the extremes.
Yes.
And Charlie Kirk was a champion of debates, and in general it seems that there's a resurgence of the format as it being something popular, especially in social media among younger generations. But the way that these debates are often framed feels very much like a game show.
Yes.
There's something unsettling about them. I'm not sure if you can please read my mind. Tell me why I'm unsettled.
So on the one hand, we want public debate, and we think it's a very positive thing when people from even opposite extremes meet and debate. I am an old-fashioned person in as much as I believe in the written word, and I believe in the book and the essay, and I believe that that's, on the whole, the best way to bring about debate, that gladiatorial verbal combat tends not to be the best way to find social consensus and social compromise. And I fear the disappearance of the book, the pamphlet.
Yeah, because the book, the pamphlet, gives you time to reflect.
Exactly.
This is, in the short attention span economy we have, this is what we get. This is the kind of debate we get.
Yes.
And what do we do about it? Is it even acceptable as...
Look, all nonviolent, all peaceful public debate is positive. That's the basic principle of a liberal democracy, is that we get to criticize power without fear. It's as simple as that. We criticize power without feeling frightened for our own safety and security. So anytime people are criticizing power, rightly or wrongly, sympathetically or unsympathetically, they're engaging in democracy. The idea of public debate, spirited public debate being part of democratic discourse is a very, very old one. Remember Cicero in the Roman Republic did all of his talking until they had to stop him by cutting off his head. In America, right, we have the great still memory of the debates between Abraham Lincoln and his opponent Douglas, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And they're still worth reading because they were exercises in eloquence, and so I'm in favor. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what we're dealing with now is something that's it's a game show. It's Cicero's drag race, It's gladiatorial.
It's the gladiators. It's impossible. You kind of present your opinion, and you're being judged, and then you're being eliminated. And also the kinds of opinions that are invited into these debates are extreme. And if I debate with you and I don't perceive you as being human, for instance, because, I consider that because you're a liberal, or because you're Jewish, or because you're this, or because whatever.
I'm all of those things.
You are, but you could not refuse to talk to me because I'm a woman, and, and hence I'm, not intellectually capable, or I'm a feminist, and hence, you will not address me. And this is what we get. And it's wonderful to say that it's best to read and it's best to debate, but how do we deal with that kind of situation now? And also the fact that lies permeate the political discourse so much. I mean, fact checkers cannot keep up with Trump.
No.
And so can you really have a debate in these conditions?
It's obvious that the premises of democratic debate are being undermined by all of the things that you're talking about. Myself, I love to debate, but I wouldn't participate in that kind of debate because it seems to me it's a pseudo-discourse. It's not real discourse where people are exchanging ideas and arguments. It's like professional wrestling. And that's part of what it is. Nonetheless, I wouldn't ban it. I wouldn't eliminate it. Democratic discourse takes many kinds, many flavors, many forms, and we, as long as it remains spirited and nonviolent and doesn't involve an invitation to violence, then we have to tolerate it. It's part of what we need to tolerate. I'll add one thing though, and I'll say this more pugnaciously, more aggressively, is that I don't think educated people should ever apologize for their education. That's something that you see in a very widespread way. People say, oh, the educated elite in France or in America are to blame for the rise of populism. No, the people who are arguing against nationalism are not responsible for the rise of nationalism. And education is an absolute good. The more educated a society becomes, on the whole, the healthier it is and the more likely we are to have genuine, productive debate. So I will never apologize for education, and I think that educated people should never feel badly about their own erudition. They should not condescend or patronize to people who haven't had the good fortune to have the time to read and study as much as we might want to. But I think one of the most dangerous parts of populist discourse is to make educated people feel guilty about their own capacity to reason, to learn, to read, and to study. That's why universities are essential institutions for democracies. They're just as important as free and fair elections. It's one of the central premises that my own writing begins with, is that free and fair elections are obviously essential to democracy. But there are many totalitarian or many absolutist countries that have elections, like Russia, and so on. And they're not what we mean by open societies, because it's just as important to have a civil society that respects pluralism, in which you can sit down at a coffee house or in a park and talk about anything without fear of being overheard, without fear of being suppressed. I hardly need to talk about it here. One of the most inspiring aspects for me of visiting Poland is that I get to visit the haunts, the places where my heroes, like Szymborska or Adam Gopnik, lived, and because they were people who, under oppression, spoke out. Sometimes they spoke politically, overtly politically, and sometimes they spoke poetically. But they created an alternative realm to the realm of absolutist politics. That's the second pedestal, the second premise of liberal democracy. Free and fair elections, of course, but an open and active civil society is the world of parks and comedy clubs and coffee houses. That's conversations like this one. That's equally important.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Klara. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. This was Adam Gopnik, longtime contributor to the New Yorker, essayist, journalist, book author. Thank you for watching. See you soon.